Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel. Tonight, we travel back to a moment when humanity did something it had never done before, and perhaps had only barely dared to imagine. A time when the sky was no longer a boundary, but a destination. When three individuals left the Earth behind, crossed a silent void, and arrived at another world. The moon landing was not just a journey through space. It was a turning point in human history. A meeting of courage, engineering, and imagination, all unfolding under the gaze of a watching planet. Millions followed along, holding their breath, as something uncertain and extraordinary took shape. What happened during those few days changed how we see ourselves. It revealed what we are capable of and hinted at where we might go next. There are moments in history that feel distant and faded. This is not one of them. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your body soften. Let your eyes grow heavy, and let your mind drift as we explore this remarkable chapter in human history. Let's begin. Humans walked on the moon before the 1960s ended. It still feels almost impossible to say out loud. Barely 2 generations after the first powered airplane flight, human beings were no longer only crossing oceans or continents. They were leaving Earth entirely. In July of 1969, 3 astronauts rode a tower of fire into space, crossed nearly 250,000 miles of emptiness, and reached the moon before that turbulent decade was over. That timing is part of what makes the achievement so astonishing. The 1960s had already been filled with conflict, fear, protest, and rapid change. Yet in the middle of all that uncertainty, a species that had spent all of history on one planet managed to plant its boots on another world. The moon stopped being a distant light in the sky and became a real place with dust, gravity, horizons, and human footprints. That shift in what was possible changed history forever. The first moon landing fulfilled President Kennedy's daring decade-long challenge. In 1961, when President John F. Kennedy told the United States that it should land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade was out, the goal sounded almost absurd. America had not yet sent anyone into orbit. The technology did not fully exist. The rockets were unreliable. The risks were enormous. Yet the challenge was so bold that it became a national mission, not only for astronauts but for engineers, mathematicians, pilots, factory workers, seamstresses, machinists, and technicians across the country. For years, the deadline hung over every launch, every test, and every failure. It pushed the space program forward at extraordinary speed. When Apollo 11 touched down in 1969, that moment was more than a technical success. It was the completion of a promise that had once seemed wildly out of reach. A sentence spoken at a podium had become footprints on another world. Neil Armstrong's first step happened with the whole world listening. When Neil Armstrong climbed down the ladder of the lunar module and prepared to place his boot on the moon, the event had already become more than an American mission. It had become a human moment. Around the world, families stayed awake deep into the night, gathered around televisions and radios, waiting for words from a place no person had ever stood before. The images were ghostly and unclear, yet nobody needed perfect pictures to understand the scale of what was happening. A man was descending onto the moon while Earth listened in real time. Armstrong's voice traveled from the lunar surface to antennas, control rooms, broadcasters, living rooms, and crowded public spaces across the planet. In that instant, geography seemed to collapse. Cities, villages, and nations were joined by a single shared act of attention. History was no longer something people would read about later. They were hearing it arrive, breath by breath, from another world. Buzz Aldrin described the moon's surface as magnificent desolation. Those two words have lasted because they capture something almost impossible to picture in advance. The moon was not beautiful in the lush, earthly sense. It had no air, no water, no movement, no sound, and no sign that life had ever touched it. What Aldrin saw around him was a vast grey stillness, broken by craters, harsh sunlight, and shadows so dark they looked almost solid. It was empty in a way Earth never is. Yet the place was also overwhelming. The starkness gave it grandeur. Nothing softened the landscape. Nothing blurred the horizon. Every ridge and depression sat under the raw light of the sun with startling clarity. That combination of beauty and barrenness was what made the scene unforgettable. It was not welcoming, but it was awe-inspiring. In a single phrase, Aldrin gave the world a way to understand the moon not as a symbol or a dream, but as a real place that felt both glorious and profoundly lonely. The Eagle landed with only seconds of fuel left. The final descent was far more dangerous than it looked from Earth. As the lunar module dropped toward the surface, alarms began flashing in the cockpit. The guidance computer was overloaded. The planned landing area was scattered with boulders and rough ground. Neil Armstrong took manual control and began searching for a safer place to put the spacecraft down. That decision saved the mission, but it also burned precious fuel. In mission control, the numbers tightened with every passing moment. Call-outs came in sharp stages. 60 seconds. 30 seconds. The margin for error was shrinking toward nothing. If the fuel ran out completely, the landing would have to be aborted in the final moments. Instead, Armstrong kept descending, balancing judgment, nerve, and speed until the Eagle settled onto the surface. Later estimates suggested that only a very small reserve remained. One of history's greatest triumphs came terrifyingly close to becoming one of its most devastating failures. Apollo 11 flew to the moon on the most powerful rocket ever built. The journey began with a machine so enormous that it still seems unreal. Saturn V stood taller than a 36-story building and was built to do something no rocket had ever done before: send human beings all the way to the moon. At launch, its engines unleashed a force so violent that the ground shook, the air trembled, and people watching from miles away could feel the power in their bodies. It burned fuel at a staggering rate, turning chemical energy into the controlled fury needed to escape Earth's grip. Yet the real wonder was not only its size. It was the precision. This giant vehicle had to lift delicately enough to protect 3 human lives, while also accelerating fast enough to reach space and send them onward toward another world. Saturn V was brute strength shaped into exact timing. Without that extraordinary rocket, the moon would have remained unreachable, no matter how daring the astronauts were. The astronauts landed in a place no human being had ever touched. Every explorer in history had at least shared the Earth with earlier life, older landscapes, and traces of something familiar. Apollo 11 was different. When Armstrong and Aldrin stepped onto the lunar surface, they entered terrain untouched by humans, untouched by animals, untouched by wind, rain, or flowing water. The Sea of Tranquility had existed for billions of years without footsteps, voices, or even the movement of air. Its dust had lain undisturbed through ages longer than human civilization can comprehend. That is part of what gives the landing its strange power. It was not just a visit to a remote place. It was contact with a world that had never known contact at all. The first impressions mattered because there had been no previous human impressions to compare them with. Every glance out the window and every boot pressed into the ground marked a true beginning. On that day, humanity reached a place that had waited in silence since before history began. Michael Collins circled the moon completely alone behind its far side. While Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the surface, Michael Collins remained in the command module, orbiting above them and carrying a burden that was both practical and deeply emotional. He was the one who had to be there when it was time to leave. If anything went wrong below, he might have to return to Earth without them. Each time his spacecraft passed behind the moon, radio contact with Earth vanished completely. For those long minutes, he was cut off from every other human being. No voices from mission control. No updates from the surface. No contact with the billions of people following the mission. On the far side, Collins became the most isolated person in human history. Yet he could not afford to drift into the poetry of that fact. He had work to do. He checked systems, maintained the orbit, and guarded the path home. Without his calm, lonely precision, the first moon landing could not have ended in reunion. Moon dust clung to everything and smelled like spent gunpowder. One of the strangest surprises of the mission was not a grand cosmic sight, but a stubborn, irritating dust. The lunar surface was covered in fine grey powder that stuck to boots, gloves, tools, ladders, cables, and suit joints. It followed the astronauts back inside the lunar module and quickly became a nuisance. On Earth, wind and water grind dust into softer shapes over time. On the moon, there is no weather to smooth anything down, so the grains remain jagged and abrasive. They behaved more like tiny shards than familiar dirt. The astronauts found it difficult to brush off, and once it was inside the cabin, they noticed a sharp smell that reminded them of spent gunpowder. The scent was unexpected because there is no air on the moon itself. The smell only appeared after the dust was brought into the oxygen-rich cabin. Even the smallest material from another world turned out to have its own surprising personality. The astronauts brought home pieces of another world in their hands. For most of history, the moon belonged to myth, poetry, religion, calendars, and dreams. Then Apollo 11 changed that by returning with actual material from its surface. Armstrong and Aldrin collected rocks, dust, and core samples and packed them for the journey home. These were not symbolic souvenirs. They were pieces of another celestial body, carried by human beings across space and delivered into laboratories on Earth. Scientists suddenly had the chance to test the moon directly rather than study it only through telescopes. The samples revealed differences in chemistry, age, and geological history that helped reshape ideas about how the moon formed and how it evolved. They made the lunar surface tangible. A child could look at a rock from the moon and understand, in a way no speech could fully convey, that people had truly gone there and returned. The distance between Earth and the moon had not vanished, but it had become touchable. Apollo 11 launched during the most intense years of the Cold War. To understand why this mission mattered so much, you have to remember that it was not unfolding in a calm age. The world of 1969 was tense, divided, and armed with terrifying power. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a struggle that reached from politics and ideology into science, technology, and prestige. Space became one of the grand stages of that rivalry. Each launch seemed to say something about which system was stronger, smarter, and more capable of shaping the future. When Apollo 11 rose from Florida, it carried more than astronauts and instruments. It carried the pressure of a global contest that had already produced Sputnik, the first human in orbit, and years of anxious headlines. That gives the landing an extra layer of drama. It was not only a voyage of discovery, it was also a statement heard around the world, made not in words, but in flame, distance, and arrival. The moon landing was watched by hundreds of millions on Earth. For a brief time, the whole planet seemed to lean toward the same screen. In homes, bars, schools, newsrooms, and public squares, people gathered to watch a signal from nearly 250,000 miles away. The pictures were grainy and pale, more shadow than detail, yet they held audiences spellbound because everyone knew what they were seeing. This was not fiction, not a rehearsal, and not a scene from some distant future. It was happening live. Broadcasters spoke in hushed tones. Families stayed awake far past bedtime. In some places it was morning, in others deep night, but the timing hardly mattered. The event cut across borders and time zones. Many who watched could not follow the technical details, but they did not need to. A human figure was moving on the moon. That simple fact was enough to make the moment unforgettable. History had become a shared broadcast, received almost everywhere at once. Saturn V was so powerful, it shook houses miles away. There are rockets, and then there was Saturn V. At liftoff, its 5 first-stage engines unleashed a violence so immense that spectators many miles from the launch site could feel it in their chests before they fully heard it. Windows rattled. Roofs trembled. The air itself seemed to pulse. People described the experience not as watching a machine rise, but as witnessing a force of nature that humans had somehow learned to build. Flames spread beneath the pad like a man-made sunrise. Smoke rolled outward in huge white billows. And slowly, almost unbelievably, this towering structure began to climb. That slowness made the power feel even greater. Something so massive was pulling free of Earth through sheer controlled fury. The launch was not elegant in the ordinary sense. It was overwhelming. You could measure its thrust in numbers, but numbers alone cannot capture what it meant to see the ground shaking while a moonship lifted into the sky. The command module was named Columbia, after a poetic American symbol. Apollo spacecraft were not treated as mere machines. Their crews gave them names, and those names helped turn aluminum, wiring, and heat shields into something more personal. For Apollo 11, the command module was called Columbia. The name drew on an older, poetic image of America, one that appeared in songs, literature, and national imagery long before the space age. It also echoed the giant cannon in Jules Verne's From the Earth to the Moon, a story that had imagined lunar travel a century before engineers made it real. That layering is part of the charm. Columbia was both modern hardware and part of a longer tradition of dreaming. It was the astronaut's home, cockpit, lifeboat, and return capsule all in one. While Eagle descended to the moon, Columbia remained the vessel that had to survive the whole journey. It carried not only a crewman in orbit, but the thread that connected fantasy, patriotism, and practical survival. The lunar module looked fragile, but it was built for another world. Seen up close, the lunar module did not resemble the sleek rockets of popular imagination. It looked angular, insect-like, and almost improvised, with spindly legs, foil-covered surfaces, and shapes that seemed too delicate for a mission so dangerous. Yet that odd appearance was the result of ruthless purpose. It was never meant to move through Earth's atmosphere, so it did not need smooth curves or aerodynamic grace. It only had to function in vacuum, land on low-gravity terrain, and then lift off again. Engineers stripped away everything unnecessary. The result was a craft that looked strange, because it answered to lunar conditions rather than earthly expectations. Its thin outer layers reflected heat, Its legs absorbed landing forces. Its windows were small and practical. To human eyes, it seemed flimsy. To the moon, it was exactly suited. That contrast is one of the mission's great visual lessons. Sometimes the future arrives looking awkward because efficiency does not care about elegance. The Eagle's computer was far weaker than a modern phone. It is one of the most astonishing contrasts in technological history. The computer that helped guide human beings to the lunar surface had only a tiny fraction of the memory and processing power now found in an ordinary smartphone. By modern standards, it was almost primitive. Yet it was also revolutionary. The Apollo guidance computer was compact, reliable, and designed to perform under conditions where failure could kill. It helped navigate, calculate, and manage the descent in real time, while astronauts worked through a flood of critical information. This was not consumer technology that happened to be useful. It was cutting-edge engineering created for a task no computer had ever assisted with before. Its limitations make the mission seem even more extraordinary, because success depended not on overwhelming digital power, but on clever design, disciplined procedures, and human judgment working breaking brew. Alongside the machine, the moon landing was not the triumph of computers replacing people. It was the triumph of people knowing exactly how to use a small computer well. Guidance alarms blared during the final descent to the surface. The last minutes before touchdown were not calm. Inside the lunar module, warning alarms began interrupting the descent with an unnerving insistence. Code numbers flashed up, demanding quick interpretation, while the spacecraft continued falling toward the moon. For viewers on Earth, the landing already felt tense. For the crew and mission control, it had suddenly become a puzzle with no time to spare. The alarms meant the computer was overloaded, struggling under more data than expected. In another setting, that might have meant immediate disaster. But years of training and careful systems knowledge now became priceless. Engineers in Houston recognized that the machine was still performing its essential tasks and advised the astronauts to continue. Imagine the nerve required. Another world was rushing up below, the spacecraft was complaining, and the mission had to go on. Those alarms were the sound of history passing through a very narrow gap, where expertise and composure kept a frightening problem from becoming a fatal one. Armstrong took manual control when the computer aimed badly. Automated systems had guided most of the descent, but in the final approach, Neil Armstrong looked out the window and saw trouble waiting below. The computer was steering Eagle toward an area strewn with boulders and rough ground that could tip the craft or damage it on contact. At that moment, the first person who would step onto the moon had to become something even more important, a pilot making a split-second decision under extraordinary pressure. Armstrong took over and flew the spacecraft by hand, easing it forward across the lunar surface while watching fuel fall and danger rise. This was not the kind of flying done in open skies with room to recover. It was delicate, hovering over a world with no air, no margin, and no second try. The move changed the landing from a planned descent into a live act of judgment. The moon landing succeeded because one man saw the problem, trusted his skill, and kept moving. The original landing site was littered with dangerous boulders. From far above, the lunar plain seemed manageable, a broad target on a silent world. But as Eagle dropped lower, the surface resolved into something much more threatening. Craters opened up. Rocks appeared. The planned landing ellipse was not a neat, welcoming patch of dust, but a rough field that could have wrecked the spacecraft in the final seconds. A hard impact on a large boulder might have damaged a leg, toppled the vehicle, or made liftoff impossible later. This is one of the great tensions of exploration. Maps and distant observations can only tell you so much. The closer you get, the more reality asserts itself. What had looked safe from orbit became a landscape full of traps when viewed by human eyes through a small spacecraft window. That moment captures the moon landing at its most vivid. Humanity had reached another world, only to discover that the last few yards were still full of ancient, indifferent hazards. The astronauts landed in the Sea of Tranquility, not on mountains. The name sounds poetic, almost dreamlike, but the place itself was a broad lunar plain formed long ago by ancient volcanic flooding. The Sea of Tranquility is one of the moon's dark regions, a vast basaltic area that appears smoother from Earth than many surrounding highlands. That smoother terrain was one reason it was chosen. Early lunar explorers did not aim for dramatic peaks or jagged ridges. They aimed for a place that improved their chances of survival. Yet the name gave the site an unforgettable quality. It made the landing sound less like a military operation and more like a meeting between humanity and the cosmos. There is something fitting about that. The first footsteps on another world did not happen on a towering summit. They happened on an open plain whose title suggested calm, even though the descent itself was anything but calm. Tranquility was both a real location and a phrase that history could never resist remembering. The moon has no air, so the landing made no roar. On Earth, we associate great machines with thunder. Rockets scream. Engines rumble. Helicopters chop the air. But the moon offers no such soundtrack because it has no atmosphere to carry sound. When Eagle descended to the surface, its engine was firing, dust was blasting outward, and metal legs were approaching alien ground. Yet outside the spacecraft, there was no roar spreading across the plain. No crash echoed from crater walls. No exhaust note rolled into the distance. The whole event unfolded in absolute external silence. That is one of the strangest things to imagine about the first landing. One of humanity's loudest achievements arrived in a place that could not hear it. The only sounds were inside the cabin, in voices, machinery, radio transmissions, and the breathing of the crew. Beyond that thin metal shell, there was only vacuum. It gives the moment an eerie grandeur. The moon received the first visitors without noise, applause, or warning, as if history had landed in a mute world. No wind blew around the flag after it was planted. The famous image of the lunar flag can mislead the eye, because on Earth, cloth usually tells us what the air is doing. We see a ripple and think of wind. But on the moon, there is no moving air to stir fabric at all. When the astronauts planted the flag, it did not flutter in any earthly sense. Instead, the cloth shifted because it had been handled, rotated, and disturbed during setup. With no atmosphere to damp the motion, the movement lingered longer than people might expect. That difference matters because it reveals how strange the moon truly is. Even simple gestures behave differently there. A flag is no longer a soft piece of fabric responding to breeze. It becomes an object moving only through direct contact and inertia. The result looked familiar enough to spark confusion, yet it was governed by rules unlike those of Earth. A symbol people understood suddenly became a lesson in lunar physics. The famous flag seemed to wave because of a metal support. The reason the flag looked spread out was not hidden drama, but practical engineering. NASA knew that without air, a normal hanging flag would droop limply downward and barely show itself. So the design included a horizontal support rod along the top, intended to hold the fabric outward so cameras could capture the image clearly. Even then, the setup was not perfectly smooth. The rod did not fully extend, which left the cloth bunched and wrinkled. Those wrinkles created the illusion of motion frozen in fabric, making the flag appear as though a breeze had caught it. In reality, the effect came from structure, not weather. That detail is fascinating because it shows how unfamiliar environments force people to rethink even the simplest objects. A flag on Earth needs wind to look alive. A flag on the moon needs hardware. The iconic image that millions remember was shaped not by lunar mystery, but by a clever attempt to make a national symbol visible in vacuum. Armstrong climbed down a ladder into complete lunar silence. There is something almost unreal about that image. A man in a pressurized suit, descending rung by rung from a machine that has just landed on another world, surrounded by light, dust, and emptiness, yet stepping toward a silence more complete than any silence on Earth. Deserts still have air. Caves still echo. Polar landscapes still carry the faint sounds of wind and movement. The moon offered none of that. As Armstrong lowered himself toward the footpad and then the surface, he entered an environment where no natural sound could reach him from outside. Every sensation we usually connect with arrival was absent. No crunch of distant debris. No rustle. No atmosphere. Only the interior world of radio voices and the suit's life support accompanied him. That helps explain why the moment feels so haunting even decades later. It was not just a descent from a ladder. It was a descent into a kind of silence no human being had ever physically entered before. His first footprint lasted because the moon has no weather. On Earth, even the most dramatic marks vanish. Rain blurs them. Wind fills them. Flowing water, frost, plant growth, and everyday erosion slowly erase almost everything left on the ground. The moon does not work that way. It has no weather, no rain, and no moving air to disturb a footprint once it has been pressed into the fine surface dust. That means Armstrong's first print, and many others made during Apollo, could remain for astonishing lengths of time. They are not eternal, because tiny meteorite impacts and the constant bombardment of space slowly alter the surface. Still, in human terms, those marks endure almost beyond imagination. Think about what that means. A single bootstep made in 1969 may outlast nations, languages, and monuments on Earth. The moon became a place where an ordinary act of walking achieved extraordinary permanence. The ground held the record because nothing there was alive or active enough to quickly take it away. Aldrin became the second human being ever to walk there. There had never been a second person on the moon before that moment, which gives Buzz Aldrin's descent a strange and powerful place in history. He emerged not into novelty alone, but into a world already altered by one set of human footprints. That gap between first and second was short in time, yet immense in meaning. For all previous exploration, second arrivals had always followed in a pattern familiar to Earth. Here, the pattern itself was being invented in real time. Aldrin stepped down knowing he was joining Armstrong in the smallest and most exclusive gathering imaginable. Two human beings standing on another celestial body. His perspective also differed. He saw the scene as someone arriving just after history had begun. There were tracks, equipment, a ladder, and the first traces of human work taking shape on the surface. The moon was no longer entirely untouched. In a matter of minutes, it had become a place where two people could share experience. The first moonwalk lasted less than 3 hours. For an event that occupies such a vast place in memory, the actual time spent outside the lunar module was surprisingly brief. Armstrong and Aldrin's first excursion on the surface lasted a little under 2.5 hours. That was enough time to change history, but not enough for wandering without discipline. Every movement had to serve the mission. They had to test how walking felt, collect samples, deploy experiments, take photographs, inspect the spacecraft, and manage their limited oxygen, cooling, and energy supplies. Even simple tasks took longer in bulky suits and low gravity. That compression gives the moonwalk much of its drama. Nothing about it was leisurely. The astronauts were living inside a schedule where each minute carried weight. Yet within that short span, they managed to do something people still speak of with awe. Humanity's first direct encounter with another world happened not across days, but in a few concentrated hours of astonishing efficiency and nerve. The astronauts moved in strange hopping steps in weak gravity. Walking on the moon was not like walking anywhere on Earth. Lunar gravity is only about 1/6 of what we feel here, so every movement changed character. The astronauts could move more easily in one sense, yet the suits were stiff, the backpacks were heavy, and balance worked differently in the lower paw. Instead of ordinary strides, they often found themselves using cautious hops, loping motions, or side-to-side bounces that looked almost playful on camera. In reality, those movements were practical solutions to an unfamiliar physical world. They had to learn quickly how to stay upright, how to change direction, and how to recover from awkward shifts of weight. Watching the footage now, the motion can seem charming, but it was also a live experiment in human movement beyond Earth. Each bounce was a lesson in how the body adapts when one of its deepest assumptions, the strength of gravity itself, is suddenly rewritten beneath its boots. Every tool they used had to work with bulky pressurized gloves. Imagine trying to pick up a small object while wearing thick, stiff gloves that resist every bend of your fingers. That was the everyday reality of working on the moon. The astronauts' gloves were essential for survival, but they also made simple tasks frustrating and exhausting. Handles had to be enlarged. Switches had to be designed for clumsy contact rather than delicate touch. Sampling devices, storage bags, cameras, and experiment parts all had to be usable by hands that could not really feel the way ungloved hands do. This challenge shaped the whole mission in subtle ways. On Earth, we build tools for fingertips, precision, and instinctive grip. On the moon, every action had to be reconsidered. Engineering had to meet human limitation directly. That is part of what makes the work so impressive. The astronauts were not just exploring another world. They were trying to do careful, meaningful tasks through layers of pressure, insulation, and resistance that turned the simplest motions into serious labor. They carried life support systems on their backs like tiny spacecraft. Those backpack units were far more than tanks strapped onto suits. Each one was a compact survival machine, keeping its wearer alive in a place that would otherwise kill in seconds. They supplied oxygen for breathing, removed carbon dioxide, circulated cooling water, powered communications, and helped regulate temperature under brutal lunar sunlight. In a real sense, each astronaut stepped onto the surface wearing a personal spacecraft. The moon had no air to inhale, no pressure to protect the body, and no mercy for equipment failure. So everything needed for life had to travel with them. That changes the way you see the moonwalk. It was not merely two people strolling across dust in suits. It was two self-contained human ecosystems moving across an alien plane. Every step depended on machinery humming quietly behind their shoulders. The backpacks made freedom possible, but they also emphasized the fragility of that freedom. On the moon, life had to be carried, maintained, and earned second by second. The moon's gravity let them move gracefully, but not easily. At first glance, the lower gravity makes lunar movement look almost effortless. The astronauts seem to float, bounce, and drift with a lightness no one on Earth can ever know naturally. But that impression is only half true. The weaker pull gave them extra lift, yet it also created a strange mismatch between body, suit, and motion. Their heavy life support packs still carried mass, which meant stopping and turning could feel awkward and delayed. A step that grows beautifully could end in an ungainly stumble if balance shifted at the wrong moment. Every move became a small negotiation with a world that was helping and hindering at once. That is what makes the footage so mesmerizing. The astronauts appear almost graceful, but the grace is hard-won. It comes from constant adjustment, quick learning, and a body trying to rewrite instincts formed under Earth's stronger grip. Beauty and difficulty arrived, together with every bounce across the dust. Moon dust was razor-sharp because it had never been worn smooth. On Earth, grains of sand and dust spend ages colliding with wind, rain, rivers, and one another. Over time, those processes chip away their edges and round them into softer forms. The Moon has no such patient sculptors. No air moves across its surface. No streams tumble stone against stone. No rain falls to soften anything. So the fine material coating the lunar ground remained jagged, angular, and harsh, like billions of microscopic shards waiting underfoot. When the astronauts brought it back in samples, scientists found a material unlike ordinary earthly dust. It was formed by endless impacts and left untouched by weathering, which made it surprisingly aggressive. That helps explain why it behaved more like ground glass than like dirt from a dry road. It is a wonderful reminder that even the Moon's dust carries the history of its world. Each tiny grain had been shaped by violence, then preserved in stillness for vast stretches of time. That dust jammed joints, scratched visors, and coated equipment. The trouble with lunar dust was not only that it stuck, it invaded. It worked its way into hinges, seals, fabric layers, and mechanical joints, where its abrasive texture began wearing at anything it touched. The astronauts found that it clung stubbornly to boots and suits, followed them into the cabin, and then spread to surfaces that needed to stay reliable. Visors collected fine scratches. Connectors became harder to manage. Moving parts started to feel the strain. The Moon, it turned out, could damage technology through something as humble as powder. That is one of the mission's most revealing lessons. Exploration is not always defeated by the obvious giant threat. Sometimes it is challenged by something small enough to sit in a crease, a latch, or the corner of a glove. Lunar dust was a kind of relentless nuisance, but one with serious consequences. It reminded NASA that another world could fight back through the tiniest and most ordinary material imaginable. The astronauts left boot prints, experiment packages, and a plaque behind. The first visit did not end with the Moon exactly as they found it. When Armstrong and Aldrin departed, they left behind more than memories. The landing site became a little cluster of human traces on an otherwise untouched world. There were footprints pressed into the soil. Scientific instruments stood where they had been deployed. Tools, containers, and mission hardware remained scattered in careful places around the module. And fixed to a landing leg was a plaque that would stay with the site long after the crew had gone. It is striking to imagine how small that human presence really was. One plane, one spacecraft, a few objects, and the marks of two people moving through dust. Yet in symbolic terms, it was enormous. Humanity had crossed space and left physical evidence of its arrival. The Moon was no longer only observed. It had become a place with artifacts, arrangement, and intention, a place that now held the first modest remains of human visitation. The plaque announced that humanity came in peace for all mankind. Few objects from the mission carry as much symbolic weight in so few words. Mounted on one of Eagle's legs, the plaque was meant to speak beyond the crew, beyond the United States, and beyond the political tensions of its time. Its message framed the landing not simply as a national achievement, but as a human one. That was a powerful choice. The mission had grown out of rivalry, budgets, and Cold War urgency, yet the plaque tried to place the act in a larger moral frame. It suggested that stepping onto another world should represent something better than competition alone. There is something moving about that idea. The first permanent message left on the moon was not a claim of ownership. It was a declaration of peaceful arrival. Whether history always lives up to such words is another matter. But in that moment, they offered a vision of exploration as something unifying, generous, and worthy of the extraordinary distance crossed. They also left medals honoring fallen Soviet and American space pioneers. One of the most touching details of the mission is that it carried remembrance into space. Among the items left on the moon were small memorial pieces honoring astronauts and cosmonauts who had died in the dangerous early years of human spaceflight. That included names from both sides of the Cold War divide. It is easy to forget how radical that was in spirit. The space race was a contest, but death had exposed a deeper truth. The risk belonged to all who climbed into rockets, no matter what flag stood behind them. By leaving those medals and memorial names on the lunar surface, the crew acknowledged that the path to the moon had been built not only through triumph, but through loss. The gesture gave the landing site a note of solemnity. It became not just a stage for victory, but a place of memory. Another world now held a quiet tribute to those who had helped make the journey possible, even without surviving to see it. Armstrong and Aldrin placed scientific instruments beside the landing site. The first landing was not designed only to prove that humans could arrive safely. It was also a scientific field mission, compressed into a short and demanding window. That is why the astronauts spent part of their precious time outside, carefully placing instruments near the module. These were not decorative additions to history's most famous photo opportunity. They were the beginning of a serious attempt to turn the moon from a destination into a laboratory. Each package had to be set up in bulky suits under time pressure on unfamiliar ground. That alone makes the work impressive. But the deeper significance lies in what it represented. The first people to stand on another world did not merely look around and leave. They started measuring. They began asking that world to reveal itself through data rather than awe alone. Exploration matured in that moment. Wonder remained, but it was joined by a more patient impulse. The desire not just to reach the moon, but to understand it. One experiment measured moonquakes deep beneath the lunar crust. The moon can look dead, frozen, and unchanging. But one of Apollo's instruments began revealing a more active story hidden below the surface. By placing a seismometer there, the astronauts gave scientists a way to listen for vibrations moving through the moon's interior. The results were fascinating. The instrument detected moonquakes, subtle tremors caused by internal stresses, meteorite impacts, and the gravitational pull of Earth itself. These were not exactly like earthquakes. The moon's dry, fractured structure made the shaking behave differently, with vibrations lingering far longer than they usually do on our planet. That eerie ringing quality helped reveal something about the lunar interior and its layered nature. In a sense, Apollo turned the moon into an object that could speak through tremors. A world that seemed silent on the outside was quietly shifting within. That is part of the enchantment of science. The first footsteps did not only touch the surface. They opened a path toward hearing the moon's hidden unrest. Another used lasers to measure the moon's distance from Earth. Among the cleverest objects left behind was a special reflector designed for laser ranging, a deceptively simple device with astonishing long-term value. Its job was not to transmit messages or move across the terrain. It just had to sit there and send light back exactly toward its source. Scientists on Earth could fire laser pulses at the moon, hit the reflector, and time the return journey. Because light travels at a known speed, that round-trip timing made it possible to calculate the Earth-Moon distance with remarkable precision. The beauty of the experiment lies in its elegance. A beam leaves Earth, touches a human-placed object on another world, and comes home carrying a measurement. This transformed the Moon from a remote body into something that could be tracked with exquisite exactness. It also deepened our understanding of how the Earth-Moon system behaves over time. A silent mirror on the lunar surface became one of the most useful scientific gifts Apollo ever left behind. That laser reflector still helps scientists measure the Moon today. One of the most remarkable things about Apollo is that part of its scientific work never truly ended. Decades after the astronauts left, researchers still use the reflector placed on the lunar surface to bounce laser pulses off the Moon and study its motion with extraordinary precision. That means one instrument set down during humanity's first visit continues contributing to science long after the television broadcast, the parades, and even the entire Apollo era have passed into history. Through those measurements, scientists can track the Moon's slow drift away from Earth, test aspects of gravitational theory, and monitor subtle details of lunar motion. There is something beautiful about that continuity. A device positioned by gloved hands in 1969 remains part of living science in the present day. The Moon landing is often remembered as a dramatic moment, but this experiment shows another side of its legacy. It was not only a spectacle. It planted something useful enough to keep answering questions for generations. The landing site became a time capsule preserved in airless darkness. On Earth, places change quickly. Weather, plants, animals, rust, vandals, and time itself alter almost everything. The Moon treats history differently. Because there is no atmosphere, no rain, and no living world to reclaim the scene, the Apollo 11 landing site remains astonishingly well preserved. The descent stage still stands where it was left. Tracks and object placements can endure for vast stretches of time. The whole area is like a frozen moment from 1969, sealed not behind glass, but in vacuum. That makes the site feel less like an abandoned camp and more like a time capsule left open on another world. Imagine arriving there in some distant future and seeing the spatial arrangement of that first visit, still readable in the dust. The Moon keeps history with eerie patience. It does not soften or quickly erase human presence. It holds it in place. That gives Apollo 11 a strange permanence, as though part of the past is still waiting intact under a black sky. The Moon rocks revealed the Moon is ancient beyond human history. When the first samples reached laboratories, scientists were no longer limited to studying the Moon from afar. They could test its material directly, and the ages locked inside those rocks told an astonishing story. Many samples pointed to events that took place billions of years ago, in a period so remote that human history disappears into insignificance beside it. Civilizations, languages, and recorded memory are almost nothing against that scale. The Moon's surface had preserved a much older archive, one formed near the beginning of the solar system. This gave the landing a deeper dimension. It was not only an encounter with another place. It was an encounter with deep time. The astronauts had scooped up fragments of a world that had been recording cosmic history since long before Earth's familiar landscapes took their present form. Holding those rocks meant holding evidence from an age that no myth, chronicle, or human monument could ever reach. The Moon turned out to be ancient in a way that humbles every story we tell. Some of those rocks were older than many rocks on Earth. That fact sounds almost paradoxical at first. The Moon is smaller and simpler than Earth, so why would its rocks sometimes preserve a more ancient history? The answer lies in how active our own planet is. Earth continually reshapes itself through plate tectonics, erosion, water, volcanic recycling, and the restless movement of its crust. Old surfaces are broken down, buried, melted, and renewed. The Moon lacks most of those processes. Its geology slowed long ago, and vast areas remained exposed with their ancient material relatively undisturbed. As a result, samples returned by Apollo included pieces that had survived from an era whose traces on Earth are often far harder to find. That makes lunar rocks wonderfully strange. They are not just foreign stones. They are survivors from a more intact past, records preserved because the Moon became geologically quiet, while Earth stayed busy rewriting itself. Another world ended up keeping parts of the early solar system's memory more faithfully than our own planet. The samples helped scientists understand how the Moon was formed. Before Apollo, there were competing ideas about the Moon's origin. Some scientists thought it might have formed elsewhere and been captured by Earth's gravity. Others imagined it had split away from Earth long ago, or condensed alongside our planet from the same material. The returned samples changed that conversation dramatically. Their chemistry and isotopic signatures suggested a strange kinship with Earth, yet not an exact match. The Moon seemed related, but also transformed. Over time, this evidence helped strengthen the now dominant giant impact theory, the idea that a Mars-sized body struck the young Earth and the debris from that catastrophe later gathered into the Moon. That story is breathtaking. It means the Moon may be the child of one of the most violent events in our planet's early history. The samples turned speculation into something testable and physical. By bringing back a few carefully collected pieces of another world, Apollo helped reveal that our nearest celestial neighbor may have been born from a collision that reshaped Earth itself. Moon rocks were later gifted to countries around the world. The samples returned by Apollo were priceless scientifically, but some also took on a diplomatic and symbolic life far beyond the laboratory. Small fragments of lunar material were mounted in displays and presented to nations around the world as goodwill gifts. These were tiny pieces of another world, offered not as ordinary diplomatic tokens, but as objects carrying the aura of one of humanity's greatest achievements. That choice mattered. It transformed the Moon from a place reached by a few into something symbolically shared by many. Leaders could display those fragments in museums, government buildings, and public institutions as reminders that the voyage had touched global imagination. There is something almost magical about that. A piece of the Moon, collected by astronauts, could end up in a case thousands of miles away on Earth, seen by people who might never visit a launch site or space center. The mission's physical legacy began spreading across the planet in small, gleaming acts of international connection. Quarantine awaited the astronauts in case the Moon carried unknown life. Today it may sound cautious to the point of fantasy, but after the first lunar landing, nobody could absolutely guarantee that the Moon was sterile. The risk seemed small, yet the stakes were too high to ignore. If unknown microorganisms somehow existed in lunar material, bringing them directly into Earth's biosphere would have been a reckless gamble. So NASA prepared for the possibility with serious procedures. The returning crew would not simply splash down, wave to cameras, and go home. They were treated as potential carriers of something utterly unfamiliar. That gives the end of the mission a strange tension. Even after surviving launch, deep space travel, descent, moonwalk, liftoff, rendezvous, and fiery re-entry, the astronauts still had one more role to play. They became subjects in a planetary precaution. It is a wonderful reminder of how little humans truly knew at the threshold of lunar exploration. The Moon had been reached, but it had not yet been fully trusted. After splashdown, they were sealed inside a mobile isolation trailer. The return to Earth did not end with a dramatic open celebration on the deck of the recovery ship. Instead, the astronauts were guided into an enclosed mobile quarantine facility, a converted trailer designed to keep them separated from the outside world until scientists were satisfied that no lunar power contamination threat existed. The image is strangely memorable. Men who had just crossed space and returned from the moon now sat behind windows inside what looked almost ordinary, speaking to visitors through glass. It was both triumphant and oddly anticlimactic, which somehow makes it even more compelling. Exploration had ended not in a throne room of glory, but in containment, procedure, and caution. The trailer became a final piece of mission architecture, one last vehicle in the chain that carried them from launch pad to ocean recovery. It also showed how seriously NASA took the unknown. Even in victory, the response was disciplined. The moon had been visited, but the Earth was still being protected. President Nixon greeted them through the window of their quarantine van. One of the most surreal scenes of the mission happened after the astronauts had already returned home. President Richard Nixon came to welcome them aboard the recovery ship, yet he could not shake their hands or stand beside them in an ordinary ceremony. Instead, he greeted them through the window of the quarantine facility where they sat isolated from direct contact. The scene had a strange theatrical quality. On one side was the President of the United States, representing national triumph and global spectacle. On the other side were the men who had just become the first lunar travelers, separated by glass like rare and valuable specimens. That image captures something essential about Apollo. It was at once heroic and clinical, emotional and procedural. Even the celebration had to obey science. Nixon's visit acknowledged the scale of the achievement, but the glass between them said something else as well. The moon had been reached, yet it still carried just enough mystery to keep its explorers apart. The astronauts wore biological isolation garments after returning to Earth. Even the first moments after recovery were shaped by the fear of contamination. Before the astronauts left the capsule area, they were given special biological isolation garments to wear, adding another layer between themselves and everyone around them. These suits were not designed for comfort or grandeur. They were precaution made visible. The symbolism is striking. The same men who had just stood on the moon under the harsh elegance of spacesuits were now dressed in simpler protective clothing, because Earth, not space, had become the environment being defended. The garments turned the astronauts into a moving boundary between two worlds. They carried with them lunar dust, samples, equipment, and the tiniest shadow of uncertainty about what else might have come back. That uncertainty did not last. Still, in those hours after splashdown, the biological suits gave the mission one final note of mystery. Humanity had touched another world, and for a little while, no one could be completely sure what had touched back. Scientists quickly found no sign of lunar microbes at all. In the end, the precautions proved unnecessary, but that result was itself a major piece of knowledge. Tests on the astronauts, the lunar samples, and associated materials found no evidence that the moon carried living microbes capable of threatening Earth. The feared contamination never appeared. That conclusion brought relief, but it also marked a turning point in how the moon was understood. It became clearer that our nearest celestial neighbor was not a hidden biological frontier, but a far more sterile and unforgiving place. There is a certain poignancy in that. For centuries, people had imagined lunar life in one form or another, filling the moon with beings, cities, or mysterious landscapes. Apollo replaced those dreams with a harsher truth. The moon was magnificent, historic, scientifically rich, and profoundly lifeless. Yet even that emptiness mattered. It told us something real about our cosmic neighborhood. Another world had finally been tested directly, and it had answered with silence, dust, rock, and no living trace at all. Apollo 11 returned to Earth by plunging through fire at immense speed. Coming home from the Moon was not a gentle glide. After days in space, the command module hit the upper edge of Earth's atmosphere at a speed so extreme that the surrounding air compressed and heated into a sheath of blazing plasma. In that instant, the spacecraft was no longer only falling. It was forcing its way through a furnace created by its own return. Outside, temperatures soared high enough to destroy ordinary materials. The only reason the crew survived was the heat shield, which slowly charred and burned away in a controlled sacrifice, carrying the worst of the heat with it. Inside, the astronauts could feel the violence of re-entry as the capsule shuddered and decelerated. It is easy to think of the moon landing as the hard part, but coming home demanded another kind of nerve. To reach another world was extraordinary. To survive the return meant trusting a small shell of engineering while the sky itself turned into fire. The command module splashed into the Pacific Ocean after 8 days. After launch, lunar orbit, surface operations, rendezvous, and the long journey home, Apollo 11's final destination was not a runway or dry ground, but a remote stretch of Pacific Ocean. That ending feels almost poetic. One of the greatest technological achievements in history concluded with a small capsule falling under parachutes toward open water. The trip had lasted just over 8 days, yet within that short span, the crew had gone farther than any humans before them and returned with the first samples from another world. When Columbia hit the ocean, the mission crossed from the realm of spaceflight back into the realm of ships, waves, and recovery crews. The contrast is part of what makes it memorable. A voyage that began on a pillar of flame ended bobbing in the sea. The vast machinery of the moon mission finally narrowed to 3 men in a floating capsule, waiting for the world to come reach them again. Recovery crews had to find them in a vast moving ocean. Splashdown sounds precise when spoken afterward, but the ocean is not a fixed target waiting politely beneath a descending capsule. It is broad, restless, and always changing. Once Apollo 11 returned through the atmosphere and descended by parachute, recovery forces still had to locate the capsule quickly and safely in that immense moving expanse. Ships, helicopters, tracking systems, and trained personnel were all part of the final act. The ocean added uncertainty to a mission that had already survived more than enough of it. Waves could obscure sightlines. Weather mattered. Timing mattered. The crew had crossed cislunar space only to depend, in the last stage, on sailors and aviators scanning a patch of water big enough to swallow history without a trace. That is one of the mission's most fascinating transitions. It moved from the cold geometry of orbital mechanics back into the practical business of search and recovery, where the final challenge was simply finding home in a sea. A Navy helicopter lifted the astronauts from the water. The image is unforgettable because it feels so unexpectedly ordinary after everything that came before. A crew who had just returned from the moon did not step onto a grand ceremonial platform first. They were lifted from the ocean by a Navy helicopter, one by one, in a practical recovery operation that looked almost like a rescue at sea. The helicopter hovered above the floating capsule while swimmers secured the area and prepared the astronauts for extraction. Then, suspended beneath the aircraft, the crew rose out of the Pacific after becoming the first humans ever to complete a lunar voyage. There is something wonderfully human about that moment. The moon may have required rockets, computers, and celestial navigation, yet the final handoff back to Earth came through rotors, cables, and disciplined military teamwork. The recovery helicopter became the bridge between the epic and the familiar. After traveling to another world, the astronauts came home swinging gently above the sea like castaways recovered from an impossible journey. The moon landing depended on over 400,000 people on Earth. The iconic images show 3 astronauts, and that can make the mission feel almost intimate, as though a tiny handful of extraordinary individuals carried the whole thing alone. In truth, Apollo 11 rested on an immense human foundation. More than 400,000 people contributed to the broader Apollo effort, from engineers and coders to technicians, contractors, machinists, factory workers, administrators, and test crews. Some designed guidance systems. Some built valves, wiring, parachutes, or circuit boards. Some checked quality, calculated trajectories, or wrote procedures. Others sewed, fueled, transported, or trained. The moon landing was not only the triumph of visible heroes, it was also the triumph of hidden labor organized on a breathtaking scale. That is part of what makes it so moving. It joined the intensely personal courage of astronauts with the distributed effort of an entire industrial civilization. When Armstrong and Aldrin stepped onto the moon, millions watched. But hundreds of thousands had already helped place those steps within reach. Seamstresses hand-stitched spacesuits tough enough for sharp lunar dust. Some of the most important work behind Apollo was done not with rockets or computers, but with needles, fabric, and astonishing precision. The spacesuits worn on the moon were handmade in crucial ways by highly skilled seamstresses, many of whom had backgrounds in bra and garment manufacturing. At first, that may sound surprising, until you consider the challenge. The suits had to flex, seal, and protect, while fitting the body closely enough for movement. They were layered with specialized materials and stitched to exacting tolerances, because even a tiny flaw could become catastrophic in vacuum. These were not costumes. They were life support systems made partly by human hands. That fact gives Apollo a beautiful complexity. It was not only a story of giant engines and hard metal. It was also a story of patient craftsmanship. On the moon, every bootstep depended in part on careful stitching done back on Earth. The path to another world ran through sewing tables as surely as it ran through launch pads. The suits had to protect against heat, cold, vacuum, and sunlight. A lunar suit had to do the work of an entire environment. On Earth, the world around you quietly handles countless tasks. Air provides pressure. The atmosphere filters radiation. Weather moderates extremes. Clothing is usually an accessory to survival, not its foundation. On the moon, that safety net vanished. The spacesuit had to stand between the astronaut and a place where direct sunlight could become intensely hot, while shadow plunged into brutal cold, where vacuum threatened the body, and where no breathable air existed at Castor. Or, layer by layer, the suit had to insulate, reflect, seal, cool, and protect. It was not one garment, but a whole system wrapped around a human frame. That is why lunar exploration feels so extraordinary. The explorers did not enter another world bare to it. They carried an artificial pocket of Earth with them, stitched and engineered into wearable form. Every moment outside the module was a reminder that survival itself had become something the suit had to actively maintain. Apollo astronauts drank water created by their spacecraft's fuel cells. Even something as simple as a sip of water became part of the marvel of Apollo engineering. The command and service module generated electrical power using fuel cells, devices that combined hydrogen and oxygen in a controlled chemical process. One useful result was electricity. Another was water. That meant the spacecraft could produce part of what its crew needed to drink while traveling through space. There is something elegant about that arrangement. The same system helping run onboard equipment also yielded a life-sustaining byproduct for the astronauts. It turned chemistry into both power and survival. In a mission where every pound mattered and every system had to justify itself, that kind of efficiency was priceless. It also adds a strangely intimate detail to the moon landing story. The crew crossed the void between worlds while drinking water made inside their own spacecraft, as though the vehicle were not just transporting them, but quietly sustaining them from within through controlled reactions humming well. Behind the panels, the spacecraft generated electricity by combining hydrogen and oxygen. Apollo did not rely on the kind of batteries most people imagine when they think of portable power. Instead, its fuel cells produced electricity through a chemical reaction that joined hydrogen and oxygen. The process was both powerful and graceful. Rather than burning fuel with flame, the cells converted chemical energy directly into electrical energy, supplying steady power for vital systems during the mission. This mattered enormously. Navigation, communications, environmental control, lighting, and onboard electronics all depended on reliable electricity. Without it, the moon journey would have collapsed into silence and darkness. Yet the method chosen also carried a kind of scientific beauty. Two gases associated with water and combustion were used in a quieter, more sophisticated way to sustain life and technology in deep space. That is one reason Apollo still feels advanced even now. It was not only a matter of brute force. Beneath the dramatic launch and re-entry was a subtler triumph, chemistry carefully harnessed to keep a tiny human world alive between Earth and Moon. Mission Control in Houston guided the voyage minute by minute. The astronauts may have been the visible edge of Apollo, but Houston was the beating analytical heart of the mission. Inside Mission Control, teams of specialists watched streams of data, tracked timelines, checked systems, updated procedures, and prepared for trouble with relentless focus. They did not simply observe from afar. They actively helped shape the mission step by step. Every burn, checklist, docking event, descent decision, and systems check unfolded under the eyes of controllers trained to notice tiny signs of danger before they turned into disaster. That gave the voyage a remarkable dual nature. One part of the mission was happening in space. The other was happening in a room on Earth filled with consoles, headsets, and intense concentration. The astronauts were never truly alone while radio linked them home. Houston extended human presence into space by thought, calculation, and judgment. It was as if the moon mission had two locations at once, one crossing the void and one patiently steering from Texas minute by minute. Thousands of engineers had rehearsed disasters before launch day arrived. Part of what made Apollo 11 possible was an almost relentless willingness to imagine failure in advance. Engineers, flight directors, and support teams spent years rehearsing problems that everyone hoped would never happen. They ran simulations of engine failures, guidance errors, power losses, aborted landings, docking issues, communication breakdowns, and medical emergencies. The point was not pessimism. It was survival. In space, the disaster can unfold too fast for invention on the spot, so the answers must often exist before the danger arrives. That gives the mission an impressive hidden structure. Beneath the smooth public narrative lay an enormous body of preparation built around worst-case thinking. Triumph depended on disciplined anxiety. The successful flight you remember was supported by countless imaginary failures that had already been explored, argued through, and practiced in rooms full of people determined not to be surprised. Apollo's confidence came not from assuming things would go well, but from working obsessively to be ready when they did not. Apollo 11 was the result of earlier tragedies and hard lessons. By the time Apollo 11 launched, the path behind it was already marked by painful setbacks, technical failures, and years of dangerous learning. The moon landing did not rise from uninterrupted progress. It emerged from a program that had repeatedly discovered how unforgiving spaceflight could be. Rockets failed. Hardware disappointed. Procedures had to be rewritten. Crews and engineers learned that even small oversights could hide lethal consequences when compressed into the sealed, high-risk environment of a spacecraft. That history gave Apollo 11 its unusual gravity. The mission was not a bold first try that happened to work. It was a mature attempt shaped by wounds, corrections, and relentless refinement. Every polished success on screen had rough, often frightening experience behind it. This makes the achievement more moving, not less. The moon was reached not because the program had escaped hardship, but because it had endured it, studied it, and kept going. Apollo 11 carried the memory of previous struggle all the way to the lunar surface. The Apollo 1 fire changed spacecraft safety forever. In January of 1967, a cabin fire during a ground test killed astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. The tragedy was swift, horrifying, and devastating for NASA. Apollo was suddenly forced to confront the deadly consequences of design assumptions that could not survive the realities of crude spaceflight. The spacecraft used a pure oxygen environment at high pressure during the test. Flammable materials were too present. The hatch design made rapid escape difficult. After the fire, these issues could no longer be treated as technical details. They became matters of life and death burned into the program's memory. Investigations led to sweeping changes in materials, wiring, procedures, and escape design. The moon landing that followed 2 years later cannot be separated from that loss. Apollo 11 stood partly on the reforms born from Apollo 1. That is why the success feels layered with sorrow as well as pride. The first landing on the moon carried forward the legacy of a crew who never got the chance. Every switch, checklist, and procedure carried the memory of that loss. After Apollo 1, safety was no longer an abstract principle or a line in a report. It became personal, immediate, and built into the smallest details of spacecraft life. Checklists were scrutinized with harder eyes. Materials were questioned. Wiring runs, hatch operations, cockpit layout, emergency access, and crew actions were all examined with new seriousness. By the time Apollo 11 flew, the crew were working inside a system reshaped by grief translated into discipline. That is part of what makes procedural language in Apollo so powerful when you look closely. Behind every calm checklist call and every practiced step was the knowledge that a mission could kill. Space exploration often appears glamorous in hindsight, but its real texture is often procedural, full of switches, timing, verification, and repeated routines. In Apollo, those routines had moral weight. They were not bureaucratic clutter around the adventure. They were the distilled memory of danger. The moon mission succeeded partly because earlier tragedy had taught NASA to treat procedure as a form of respect. The mission used slide rules, paper charts, and human judgment. Apollo belongs to a fascinating moment in technological history, one where advanced computing existed, but not yet in the overwhelming everyday form we take for granted. Alongside digital systems, the mission still relied heavily on paper procedures, printed charts, hand calculations, and the seasoned judgment of people who understood the machinery deeply. Engineers and controllers worked in a world where mental discipline mattered enormously. Astronauts carried checklists and notebooks. Flight planning involved tools that now feel almost antique. Yet this was no sign of backwardness. It was the working edge of precision of the time. The moon was reached through a partnership between limited computers and highly trained minds that knew when to trust the machine and when to question it. That combination gives Apollo much of its enduring charm. It was futuristic, but not detached from human intellect. The mission's genius lived as much in disciplined thinking, annotated paper, and practiced reasoning as it did in electronics and code. Tiny mistakes in space could grow into deadly problems very quickly. Space punishes carelessness with unusual speed. On Earth, small errors can often be corrected before they become catastrophic. In space, a loose connection, a missed switch position, an incorrect number, or a delayed response can cascade through sealed systems and high-risk environments with frightening force. That truth shaped Apollo at every level. Precision was not a luxury. It was survival. A tiny fault in navigation could shift a trajectory. A minor systems oversight could threaten power, air, or communication. A simple procedural slip during docking, descent, or ascent could become fatal before anyone had time to recover. That constant tension is part of what makes the moon landing feel so breathtaking in retrospect. Every stage depended on people and machines operating with extraordinary accuracy under pressure. The mission's beauty comes partly from that fragility. It was not safe because danger was absent. It was safe because thousands of individuals treated tiny details as if human lives depended on them, because they absolutely did. Armstrong had already survived a terrifying spacecraft failure before Apollo. Neil Armstrong arrived at Apollo 11 with a reputation for calm that had been tested in a truly frightening way. During a training and flight career full of danger, one of the most dramatic moments came in a lunar landing training vehicle accident. The strange machine was designed to mimic aspects of lunar descent near Earth, and during one flight it spun out of control just seconds before disaster. Armstrong had to eject at the last possible moment, parachuting to safety as the vehicle crashed and exploded. The incident revealed something essential about him. He was not calm because nothing had ever gone wrong. He was calm because he had already met sudden chaos and responded with speed, precision, and composure. That mattered profoundly for Apollo 11. When alarms flashed and the landing site turned hazardous, NASA did not have a novice at the controls. It had a pilot whose steadiness had been earned under real danger. His famous coolness was not image. It was survival history. Aldrin brought deep expertise in orbital rendezvous mathematics. Buzz Aldrin was not only a brave astronaut, he was also one of the mission's great intellectual assets. Before Apollo, he had studied orbital rendezvous in extraordinary detail, earning a doctorate focused on the complex problem of how spacecraft can meet and dock in space. That may sound dry at first, but rendezvous was one of the crucial skills that made lunar missions possible. The entire architecture of Apollo depended on separating and rejoining spacecraft successfully. If the lunar module could not meet the command module after ascent, the moon landing would become a trap. Aldrin's expertise meant that one of the men on board understood this challenge at a very deep level, not just as a pilot following instructions, but as someone fluent in the mathematics behind the maneuver. That gives his presence a wonderful richness. He was not simply along for the ride. He embodied part of the theory that made the ride possible. Apollo carried scholarship to the moon along with courage. Collins had to be ready to return home alone. Perhaps the loneliest burden of the mission was the possibility that Michael Collins might have to leave lunar orbit without Armstrong and Aldrin. If something went wrong with the ascent from the moon, if Eagle could not lift off or could not rendezvous properly, Collins would face a terrible duty. He could not land to rescue them. He could not remain forever in orbit. At some point, he would have to bring Columbia back to Earth alone. That possibility was real enough to live in the background of the mission, even if everyone hoped never to speak it aloud too directly. It gives Collins's role a quiet nobility. He was not only supporting the landing from orbit, he was carrying the emotional and operational weight of a nightmare scenario. Imagine circling above the moon, knowing your crewmates might become permanent residents below. His task demanded technical excellence, but also a rare kind of mental strength. Apollo required not only daring on the surface, but endurance in solitude above it. While two men landed, one remained the key to getting home. The drama of the moon landing naturally draws the eye downward, toward the ladder, the footprints, and the dust. But the mission's true shape was triangular, not dual. While Armstrong and Aldrin worked on the surface, Michael Collins remained in lunar orbit with the command module, and without him, the mission could not end in survival. Columbia was the ship that would carry everyone back to Earth after the lunar module's ascent stage rejoined it. Collins had to maintain systems, preserve the orbit, and be ready for rendezvous at exactly the right time. In that sense, he was the quiet guardian of return. Exploration often celebrates the visible first step, yet Apollo reminds us that reaching a new world means little if no one can bring the explorers home again. Collins represented that hidden half of greatness. He did not walk on the moon, but he protected the line between triumph and tragedy. Two men landed. One man kept the doorway back to Earth open. Collins could not see Earth while passing behind the moon. There was a moment in every orbit when Michael Collins slipped around the far side of the moon and lost the sight of Earth entirely. Not just its radio voices, but the planet itself. No blue sphere hanging in the black. No visual reminder of home. Just the curved bulk of the moon, the instruments of Columbia, and the knowledge that everyone he had ever known was hidden beyond a wall of rock. That absence gives his journey a haunting quality. Earth is usually the fixed point in every human story, the place beneath every horizon, the certainty that there is always somewhere to return to. For Collins, even that certainty vanished for a time. He moved through a region where home was not visible at all. It is hard to imagine the psychological weight of that. He was not only far away, he was briefly cut off from the sight of the world itself, circling behind another one in complete visual exile. Radio contact vanished completely whenever Columbia went around the far side. Each time the command module slipped behind the moon, radio communication ended at once. There was no partial signal, no fading voice, and no safety net of faint static carrying reassurance. One moment Collins could hear Houston and the crew below. The next, the moon itself blocked every transmission. This blackout was expected, yet expectation does not make silence feel smaller. It meant that for those minutes, no one on Earth could help him, no one could monitor him in real time, and no one could hear if something went wrong. That detail reveals how physical and unforgiving spaceflight really is. Even in the age of global broadcasting, a single body of rock could still impose total isolation. The mission had reached a place where line of sight decided whether humanity remained connected. On the near side, Apollo was a conversation. On the far side, it became a sealed experience. Collins passed through that zone again and again, carrying the mission through intervals of complete communicative darkness. For those minutes, the loneliest human being alive was Michael Collins. The phrase is famous because it fits with unusual precision. During those passages behind the moon, Collins was farther from every other human being than anyone in history had ever been, while also being completely cut off from contact. Armstrong and Aldrin were together below. The world was together back on Earth. Collins alone occupied the spacing between, circling a world that blocked both sight and speech. Yet what makes this so powerful is not merely the distance. It is the responsibility. He was not drifting in poetic solitude with time to stare out the window and muse on existence. He was actively managing the spacecraft that stood between his crewmates and permanent abandonment. That combination of isolation and duty is what gives his experience its rare emotional force. Many explorers have traveled alone. Few have done so while carrying the quiet burden of a mission that could not be completed without them. His loneliness was not empty. It was full of purpose. The moon landing happened less than 66 years after the first airplane flight. That time span is one of the most astonishing measures in all of history. In 1903, the Wright brothers managed a powered flight that lasted only seconds and covered a distance shorter than many houses. Less than 66 years later, human beings were landing on the moon. The same species that had only just learned to leave the ground had already learned to cross the vacuum between worlds. It is difficult to find any other technological leap that feels quite so dramatic. The early age of aviation was full of canvas, wood, exposed engines, and raw risk. Yet within one long human lifetime, that fragile beginning led to rockets, spacecraft, orbital mechanics, computer guidance, and a successful lunar landing. The speed of that transformation gives Apollo part of its mythic power. It makes the moon landing feel not only advanced, but accelerated, almost beyond belief. Human ingenuity did not merely progress. For a few decades, it seemed to race forward like history itself had found a new engine. Humanity went from fragile biplanes to the moon in one lifetime. Imagine a person born in the era of early flight, when pilots wore goggles and scarves, when aircraft shuddered in open air, and long-distance flying still felt almost miraculous. That same person could live to see astronauts walk on the moon. That is not a metaphor. It is a real span of human experience. In one lifetime, aviation moved from tentative wooden machines hopping over sand to spacecraft navigating across hundreds of thousands of miles of emptiness. The emotional power of Apollo deepens when you remember that many people watching it had lived through both ends of that transformation. The distance between the first airplanes and the moon was not just technological, it was imaginative. People had to rethink what humans were for, what machines could do, and how quickly limits might collapse once challenged seriously enough. That is why the landing still feels almost dreamlike. It was the kind of leap that usually belongs to fiction, yet it unfolded within living memory. The mission carried a tiny piece of the Wright brothers' flyer. Apollo 11 did not leave aviation's first age behind entirely. Tucked aboard the mission was a small piece of fabric and a splinter of wood from the Wright brothers' flyer, the machine that made the first powered flight possible. That gesture linked two moments that might otherwise feel too far apart to belong to the same story. The fragile craft that first rose above the sands of Kitty Hawk had, in a symbolic sense, reached the moon. There is something deeply moving in that continuity. It says that technological revolutions do not erase their beginnings. They carry them forward. The moon landing may have looked like the future, but it still honored the modest, risky experiment from which modern flight had grown. A few fragments of that early airplane crossed the void as silent passengers, witnessing how far the idea of human flight had traveled. In miniature, Apollo brought the age of canvas and propellers to the threshold of another world. Armstrong's heartbeat surged during the most dangerous moments of landing. Neil Armstrong is often remembered for remarkable calm, but the medical data from the descent reminds us that calm and fear are not opposites. They can exist together. During the most dangerous stretch of the landing, as alarms flashed, fuel dropped, and the surface rushed closer, his heart rate rose dramatically. His body knew exactly how serious the danger was, even while his actions remained controlled and deliberate. That contrast makes the landing feel more human and more impressive. Armstrong was not some machine-like figure untouched by stress. He was a living person, experiencing intense physiological strain, while still making clear judgments under extreme pressure. The pulse racing inside his suit was the pulse of a species taking an enormous risk. It adds a layer of intimacy to the moment. Beneath the history, beneath the training, beneath the practiced voice on the radio, there was a heart beating hard inside a pilot who had to get everything right in real time. The lunar module had no seats during descent to the surface. That detail surprises many people because we imagined spacecraft cockpits as places where astronauts strap into chairs surrounded by controls. Eagle worked differently. During the descent to the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin stood rather than sat, secured by restraints while facing the windows and instrument panels. The design was driven by practicality. Seats would have added weight, taken up precious room, and reduced visibility in a tiny cabin where every inch mattered. Standing allowed the astronauts a better view of the terrain below, which became crucial when the landing grew more dangerous. It also made the whole event feel strangely direct. They were not reclining passengers carried downward by automation. They were upright participants, peering out at another world and actively guiding the final approach. There is something vivid about that image. Humanity's first landing on the moon was not made from comfortable chairs. It was made standing up, as if the moment itself demanded that they meet it on their feet. The astronauts stood upright while flying down to the moon. The descent inside Eagle was unlike almost any form of travel people know. Armstrong and Aldrin were not seated in rows, not strapped into a fighter cockpit, and not resting in some cushioned futuristic chamber. They stood in a cramped cabin, supported by straps, leaning into controls while looking out at the lunar surface through sharply angled windows. That posture made the landing feel almost tactile. It brought their bodies into the act of flying in a way that seems unusually physical for a spacecraft. They were not only thinking through the descent, they were bracing for it, balancing through it, and meeting the moon in an upright human stance. The image has a subtle grandeur. People usually picture great technological achievements as moments of sitting before instruments. Apollo's final descent was more like standing at the threshold of another world and lowering yourself toward it. The first lunar landing was flown not from chairs, but from a poised and tense vertical posture. Windows on the lunar module were small, angled, and difficult. Trying to land on the moon through Eagle's windows was no simple visual task. The windows were small because weight and structure mattered, and they were angled in ways that served the craft's unusual design rather than human comfort. That meant Armstrong and Aldrin had to work hard to interpret what they were seeing. Their view of the surface was limited, geometric, and often awkward. There was no panoramic windshield offering an easy cinematic descent. Instead, the moon appeared through carefully positioned panes that required skill to use well. This matters because it makes the landing feel even more impressive. Armstrong had to judge terrain, motion, and safety while peering through a viewing setup that gave him only fragments rather than a glorious sweep. Exploration often sounds clean and majestic in hindsight. In reality, it can involve trying to read danger through inconvenient angles while your fuel disappears. The moon was first approached not through a perfect window, but through a demanding one. Armstrong judged the landing partly by watching shadows race below. In the final seconds of descent, one of the most useful guides was not a gauge or spoken instruction, but shadow. Armstrong watched the changing movement of the spacecraft's shadow on the lunar surface to help judge height, drift, and approach. That detail is wonderfully vivid because it feels so ancient and so modern at once. Even amid computers, engines, and radio traffic, a pilot still used one of the oldest visual clues imaginable: the behavior of light and darkness on the ground below. It also reveals how immediate the landing had become. By then, the descent was no longer an abstract calculation. It was a direct visual conversation between spacecraft and terrain. The shadow sped, shifted, and sharpened as Eagle came lower, turning sunlight into practical navigation. There is something beautiful about that. The first landing on another world was helped by the same simple phenomenon that guides anyone watching their own shadow change at sunset. Except here, it was happening on the moon. The Eagle's engine never touched the ground during touchdown. Eagle did not settle onto the moon like a car parking neatly on a road. Its descent engine remained above the surface, and the craft touched down on its legs while the engine itself stopped short of direct contact with the ground. That mattered because the geometry of landing had to be carefully controlled. The engine had to slow the module enough for a survivable touchdown without kicking up chaos or striking the surface in a damaging way. For a machine descending onto an airless world, even this final relationship between nozzle and ground was part of the delicate choreography. It adds to the surreal quality of the moment. The craft hovered, balanced, lowered, and then came to rest with astonishing poise, its body supported by thin-looking legs above a field of dust. The moon landing was not a crash softened by luck. It was a controlled arrival in which even the engine's distance from the ground formed part of success. Landing on the moon required balancing thrust with astonishing precision. The final descent was a matter of exquisite control. Too much thrust and Eagle would hover wastefully or climb. Too little and it would fall too fast for safety. Every second demanded a careful balance between gravity, fuel use, descent rate, and horizontal motion. Unlike an airplane coming down through air, the lunar module could not rely on lift from wings or the cushioning effect of an atmosphere. It had to manage its fall through engine control alone. That is what makes the landing feel so miraculous. A large part of it came down to controlling one sustained argument between gravity and thrust, with human lives hanging inside the outcome. The moon below was indifferent. It would accept either a gentle touchdown or a fatal impact with equal silence. Apollo succeeded because the spacecraft's engine, its guidance, and Armstrong's judgment met that challenge with extraordinary exactness. The first lunar landing was not only bold, it was a masterpiece of measured force held in unstable balance. One broken circuit breaker nearly trapped the astronauts on the moon. After the moonwalk, a surprisingly small problem threatened the mission in a terrifying way. A circuit breaker switch connected to the engine that would launch the ascent stage back into lunar orbit was accidentally broken. Suddenly, the path home depended on a damaged control no larger than something you might overlook in an ordinary room. That is one of the most chilling truths in Apollo. After all the giant rockets and grand achievements, the mission could still be endangered by a tiny piece of hardware inside a cramped cabin. If that switch could not be activated, Armstrong and Aldrin might not be able to ignite the engine that would lift them from the moon to rejoin Collins. The contrast is unforgettable. The whole world thinks of Apollo in terms of vast machinery, yet one small, broken part nearly became the hinge between triumph and permanent entrapment. Spaceflight is full of such brutal scale shifts, where the grand and the tiny collide. Aldrin improvised a solution with a felt-tip pen. The fix for that broken circuit breaker sounds almost absurdly humble beside the grandeur of the mission. Buzz Aldrin realized that the opening left by the damaged switch could be pressed with the tip of a felt-tip pen, effectively replacing the missing control with an ordinary object carried inside the spacecraft. That improvised solution helped save the ascent from the moon. There is something deeply satisfying in that moment because it cuts through the myth of flawless technological perfection. Apollo was magnificent, but it still depended on human ingenuity under pressure. Faced with a potentially catastrophic problem, Aldrin did not summon some secret futuristic backup system. He used a pen. The simplicity makes the story unforgettable. It reminds us that intelligence in exploration is not only about equations and engineering plans. Sometimes it is about noticing what is in your hand, understanding the problem clearly, and finding a way through. On the moon, one of history's greatest missions was helped by office-like improvisation. Even on the moon, simple objects could save a mission. Spaceflight often dazzles us with complexity, but Apollo also reveals the opposite truth. Sometimes the thing that preserves a mission is not a grand piece of engineering, but a modest object used at exactly the right moment. The felt-tip pen episode captures that beautifully. On another world, inside one of the most sophisticated machines humans had ever built, a low-tech item became essential because a tiny problem needed a practical mind more than an elaborate machine. That fact gives the moon landing an almost comforting humanity. The voyage was not made entirely of inaccessible genius. It still relied on the same kind of improvisational thinking that helps people solve problems in garages, workshops, kitchens, and offices. A mission that crossed space still had room for quick hands and common sense. That blend is part of Apollo's enduring magic. It was advanced enough to reach the moon, but still human enough to remember that sometimes survival turns on the clever use of something simple. The astronauts slept only fitfully before and after the moonwalk. History often looks smooth from a distance, but the bodies living through it were tired, wired, and uncomfortable. Armstrong and Aldrin did not enjoy restful sleep before or after their excursion. The lunar module was cramped, noisy, and awkward for rest. Equipment hummed. Procedures loomed. Excitement and stress were impossible to switch off completely. Even the practical realities of sleeping in that environment made comfort hard to achieve. This adds an important texture to the moon landing. The first people on another world did not stride into history in some perfect state of calm and restoration. They were doing exhausting work while managing disrupted sleep, intense schedules, and the strange awareness that every task mattered enormously. That makes their performance more impressive. Fatigue is an ordinary human weakness, yet they carried it with them into an extraordinary setting and still succeeded. Apollo was not accomplished by superhuman beings free from bodily limits. It was accomplished by tired people who kept going. Spaceflight schedules were relentless even during history-making moments. One of the most striking things about Apollo is how little the mission paused to admire itself. Even while events of world-changing significance were unfolding, the crew and controllers had to stay inside a demanding timeline of checks, communications, rest periods, consumables management, navigation, and preparation for whatever came next. The schedule did not care that the first human footsteps on the moon had just occurred. It kept moving. That relentlessness reveals the true character of spaceflight. Great moments do not suspend operational reality. If anything, they are woven tightly into it. The astronauts might have stood inside one of the most celebrated moments in human history, yet they still had to think about procedures, timelines, and the next required action. There is something sobering and fascinating in that. Apollo was not a dream sequence floating above practical concerns. It was a chain of tasks, each one pressing into the next, where history had to share space with discipline, fatigue, and the unromantic rhythm of mission work. Their food came in packets designed for weightlessness and tight space. Eating on Apollo was nothing like a celebratory meal shared after a grand accomplishment. Food had to be carefully packaged for a spacecraft environment where space was limited. Crumbs could become troublesome, and preparation had to remain simple and efficient. Meals came in pouches, bite-sized forms, and rehydratable packets designed to work with the realities of weightlessness during most of the mission. This detail matters because it grounds the voyage in bodily reality. Even while traveling to the moon, the astronauts still had to deal with hunger, taste, hydration, and routine nourishment. The epic and the ordinary sat side by side. A person could land on another world and still later tear open a food packet in a confined cabin. There is something captivating about that contrast. It reminds us that exploration is lived through the daily needs of the body. The moon landing was not only a triumph of propulsion and navigation. It was also a mission sustained by carefully engineered lunches. The moon's sky looked black even in blazing sunlight. One of the strangest visual shocks of the lunar surface is that the sky stayed black even under direct, fierce sunlight. On Earth, daylight fills the sky with blue because our atmosphere scatters sunlight in all directions. The Moon has no such blanket of air, so sunlight travels straight to the ground without painting the space above. The result is deeply uncanny. The surface can be brilliantly lit, harshly shadowed, and almost dazzling in brightness, while overhead the sky remains as dark as midnight. That contrast gives the Moon much of its otherworldly character. It looks like day and night have somehow been folded together into a single scene. The astronauts stood in sunlight strong enough to illuminate every detail around them, yet above them hung a black void untouched by the glow. It is one of those facts that instantly makes the Moon feel real in a new way. Another world does not only look different, its light behaves differently too. Earth appeared hanging in darkness above the grey horizon. One of the strangest sights on the Moon was not the ground below, but the world above. From the lunar surface, Earth did not stretch beneath the astronauts, as home always had. It hovered in the black sky, suspended over the ash-grey horizon like a bright, living lantern. Oceans, clouds, and continents were gathered into one glowing sphere, all of human history condensed into a single, distant object. That reversal must have felt almost impossible to absorb. For the first time, a person could stand somewhere else and look back at Earth as a place rather than as everything. The familiar became suddenly finite. Nations disappeared. Borders vanished. Weather systems swirled over a whole world that looked delicate enough to cup in the mind, though never in the hand. The moon landing changed perspective in a literal sense. Human beings had gone far enough that home itself could now be seen hanging in space, beautiful, remote, and heartbreakingly complete. From the moon, Earth looked small, bright, and unbelievably alive. The lunar landscape was stark, dusty, and silent, but Earth shone with color and motion. Against the dead stillness of the moon, our planet must have looked almost extravagant. White clouds moved across deep blue oceans. Brown and green land masses curved beneath a thin atmosphere glowing with light. Seen from that barren surface, Earth was not just another sphere in the sky. It was a place bursting with weather, water, air, life, and constant change. That contrast may be one of the most powerful emotional legacies of Apollo. The moon revealed Earth by opposing it. On the surface of another world, the astronauts could see how rare and active home truly is. It was not merely their point of origin. It was an oasis hanging in darkness. The voyage outward made life itself more visible. Distance stripped away routine, and what remained was a vivid, shining planet that looked astonishingly alive against the lifeless quiet around it. The landing transformed Earth itself into a shared human image. Before Apollo, most people experienced Earth from the inside, through landscapes, maps, flags, and local belonging. The moon landing helped create something new. It turned Earth into a visible whole, an image of one planet seen from outside. That shift mattered far beyond spaceflight. For perhaps the first time at mass scale, people could think of themselves not only as citizens of a country, but as inhabitants of a single world suspended in space. The power of that image came from its simplicity. No border appeared from the moon. No language, ideology, or empire could be seen. There was just one bright globe holding everyone. That perspective did not erase conflict, but it did offer a larger frame in which to place it. Apollo brought back more than rocks and film. It brought back a new way of imagining human identity. By reaching the moon, people learned how to look at Earth as one place, shared by all and fragile in the dark. Apollo photographs helped deepen the modern environmental movement. The space age did something unexpected for life on Earth. By photographing our planet from beyond it, Apollo helped make environmental awareness more vivid and emotionally immediate. Images of Earth floating alone in darkness gave people a new sense of its limits. Here was no endless frontier of land and sky. Here was one small world with one atmosphere, one surface of oceans and continents, and no visible backup waiting elsewhere. That vision landed during a period when pollution, conservation, and ecological concern were already growing topics, and it gave those concerns a powerful symbol. The planet looked beautiful, but it also looked vulnerable. Thin clouds and light traced the only home humanity had. Many who saw those images felt a sharpened sense that Earth needed protection, not because it was abstractly important, but because it was visibly singular. Apollo made the environment harder to ignore by showing the whole planet at once, alone and finite in space. The mission showed that computers and humans worked best together. Apollo 11 was not a story of machines replacing people, nor of people triumphing by ignoring machines. Its deepest lesson may be that the greatest success came from partnership. The onboard computer handled calculations, guidance tasks, and vital support at speeds no human mind could match. But when the unexpected happened, human judgment stepped in, interpreted the situation, and chose the right course. Armstrong, Aldrin, Collins, and the teams in Houston were not servants to automation. They were collaborators with it. That balance made the mission feel modern in a lasting way. The future was not simply colder and more mechanical. It still needed intuition, experience, and nerve. During the landing, alarms, data, and visual cues all mattered, yet none of them mattered alone. Success came from knowing what the computer was doing, what it was not doing, and when a human pilot had to decide. Apollo remains a beautiful example of technology at its best, extending human ability without replacing human responsibility. Children watched Apollo 11 and later became scientists and engineers. For many adults, the moon landing was the fulfillment of a national promise or a geopolitical triumph. For children, it was often something even more potent. It was proof that impossible things could become real within the world they already lived in. A child watching those grainy pictures in 1969 might suddenly understand that science was not only a school subject, and engineering was not only abstract work. These were pathways to wonders that touched the moon. Many future scientists, pilots, doctors, astronauts, and inventors later spoke of Apollo as a spark that stayed with them for years. That is one of the quiet miracles of the mission. Its influence did not end when the astronauts returned. It continued inside the imaginations of people too young to take part, but old enough to be changed by what they saw. The landing became a seed planted in countless minds, growing into careers and ambitions that reshaped the decades that followed. The moon landing inspired art, music, film, and dreams for decades. Some achievements remain confined to textbooks and museums. Apollo escaped those boundaries almost instantly. The first landing on the moon spilled into songs, novels, films, paintings, posters, advertisements, poems, and the broader architecture of modern imagination. Artists saw in it triumph, loneliness, futurism, fragility, and wonder. Filmmakers borrowed its imagery. Musicians turned it into metaphor. Writers used it to ask what humanity is for, what exploration means, and how distance changes the heart. Even people who knew little of the technical mission absorbed its symbols: the ladder, the footprint, the flag, the black sky, the Earth hanging far away. That enduring creative afterlife is part of what makes Apollo feel larger than a historical event. It became a cultural language. The moon landing was not only remembered, it was reimagined, replayed, and woven into dreams about the future. Long after the mission ended, its imagery continued working inside human creativity, like a signal that never fully faded. Conspiracy claims ignore the enormous mountain of evidence left behind. The idea that the moon landing was faked survives mostly because dramatic suspicion can be more emotionally seductive than careful evidence. But the actual record left by Apollo is immense. There are mission transcripts, telemetry logs, engineering documents, photographs, films, sample analyses, tracking data, and physical artifacts examined by experts across decades. Independent observatories and international stations followed the mission in real time. Scientists around the world studied the returned rocks. Later spacecraft photographed the landing sites directly. The evidence does not rest on one photograph or one government statement. It rests on a vast interlocking body of proof that would be almost impossible to fabricate without absurdly impossible global coordination. What makes Apollo persuasive is not a single dramatic answer to a rumor. It is the sheer weight of accumulated reality. The mission left behind too many traces in too many forms, examined by too many people for denial to stand against it. The moon landing happened because the evidence keeps pointing there. Independent tracking stations across the world followed the mission in real time. Apollo was never something only NASA could see. As the mission unfolded, tracking stations and observers in multiple countries followed its progress, monitored signals, and confirmed the voyage as it happened. That matters because it places the moon landing beyond the walls of any one institution. The spacecraft moved through a world already full of antennas, observatories, and technically capable watchers who had their own reasons to pay attention. Signals do not respect political storytelling. They either arrive from where they should, or they do not. During Apollo, they did. The mission could be tracked across distance by organizations outside the United States, including those in countries that had no reason to help preserve a false narrative. This gives the landing a wider reality. It was not merely announced to the world. It was independently observed by the world. The moon voyage unfolded in public, through physics and radio, under the eyes and ears of a planet listening from many directions at once. Moon rocks brought back by Apollo differ from anything forged on Earth. The samples returned by Apollo did not merely look impressive in glass cases. Under close study, they revealed chemical and geological features that set them apart from ordinary earthly material. Their mineral structures, lack of water-driven weathering, exposure signatures, and isotopic characteristics told a story of formation and history, unlike the rocks people usually handle on Earth. They had been shaped in a world without rain, rivers, oxygen-rich air, or plate tectonics. Some contained tiny glassy traces from impacts and solar wind effects impossible to reproduce exactly through normal Earth geology. That is one reason the samples became such powerful evidence. They were not just foreign because astronauts said so. They were foreign because the rocks themselves testified to a radically different environment. Science could interrogate them directly, and they answered with lunar history written into their composition. Apollo did not bring back vague souvenirs. It brought back material so distinctive that another world announced itself through stone and dust. Later spacecraft photographed the Apollo 11 landing site from orbit. Decades after the first landing, spacecraft orbiting the moon gained the ability to look down with enough detail to identify the remains of Apollo on the surface. This added a new kind of proof, one unavailable in 1969. The landing site could now be seen from above by robotic eyes, sent long after the original mission, allowing modern observers to examine where Eagle touched down and what still remained there. That is such a satisfying continuation of the story. Humanity first reached the moon in person. then later returned by camera to look back at its own earlier footprint from orbit. History became visible in a fresh way. The site was no longer only remembered through transcripts and television. It could be inspected again as a real location on the Moon. Later spacecraft turned memory into renewed observation. The first landing ceased to be only a past event and became something present enough to photograph, confirming that the traces of Apollo still waited on the lunar plain. Those images show descent marks, equipment, and the astronauts' paths. The orbital photographs are powerful not because they are cinematic, but because they are specific. They reveal the descent stage left on the surface, the scattering of mission hardware, and even the trails where the astronauts moved across the dust. These are not grand, symbolic impressions. They are practical traces, the kind left by real activity in a real place. That specificity makes the evidence strangely moving. You are not merely told that people walked there. You can see the logic of their presence written into the layout of objects and the faint routes between them. It is almost archaeological. Another world preserves the work pattern of a brief human visit, and later machines can still read it from above. The mission becomes legible in physical marks. That matters because it gives Apollo a kind of quiet realism. History did not vanish into legend. It remained on the surface in paths and placements. The Moon kept the record, and later cameras learned how to see it. The Moon landing was not the end, but a beginning. Apollo 11 is often remembered as a climax, and in one sense it was. A promise had been fulfilled. A race had been won. A threshold had been crossed. But the landing also opened a door rather than closing one. It proved that human beings could travel to another world, work there, and come home again. That changed the future by changing the scale of what could be planned. Once something exists in reality, it is harder to dismiss as fantasy forever after. The first landing created new questions, new ambitions, and new standards for exploration. It turned the Moon from a distant object into a place where later missions could aim with greater confidence and greater scientific purpose. That is why Apollo 11 still feels alive in history. It was not only a monument to what had been achieved. It was a starting point for everything that might come next. The first arrival mattered because it made later arrivals imaginable in a different way. 5 later, Apollo missions landed in even more challenging lunar terrain. Apollo 11 proved the concept, but the missions that followed showed growing confidence. Later crews did not simply repeat the first landing in similar places. They traveled to more complex sites with rougher terrain, deeper scientific promise, and greater operational ambition. Some visited highlands. Some explored dramatic valleys and mountain regions. The crews stayed longer, collected more samples, deployed more instruments, and used lunar rovers to travel farther from their landing points. In that sense, Apollo 11 was the opening chapter rather than the whole story. The first landing had to prioritize survival and demonstration. Later missions could push harder toward exploration. This progression is fascinating because it shows how quickly human activity can evolve once a frontier has been crossed. The Moon ceased to be merely reachable and became explorable. Each later mission built on the courage of the first by asking more from astronauts, hardware, and planning. Apollo did not stop at one set of footprints. It learned to make the Moon a field site. Apollo 11 remains the first time humanity stepped onto another world. That sentence still carries a kind of electric force because it describes something no later mission has displaced. Many spacecraft have landed elsewhere. Robots have rolled across Mars, fallen through alien atmospheres, and sampled distant terrain. But Apollo 11 remains the first occasion on which human beings themselves physically stepped onto another celestial body. There is no way to make that ordinary. For all the technological changes since, the historical rank of that moment remains untouched. It marks the instant when the human story ceased to belong entirely to Earth's surface. That is why the event continues to feel almost mythic. It occupies a category so rare that comparison becomes difficult. There can be many later missions, many better images, many more advanced systems, yet there can only be one first human step onto another world. Apollo 11 owns that place forever. The moon landing is not simply famous. It holds a unique distinction in the entire history of life on this planet. No human has walked on the moon since the 1970s. This fact gives Apollo a strange and haunting quality. The first landings happened in an age that now feels both close and impossibly distant, and then the footsteps stopped. Since the final Apollo mission in the 1970s, no human being has returned to walk on the lunar surface. That long absence changes how we feel about the original missions. They no longer seem like the beginning of a smooth, permanent expansion outward. Instead, they stand like brilliant peaks, separated from us by decades of silence. The gap makes the achievements feel lonelier and, in some ways, more astonishing. Technology advanced. Computers transformed. Satellites multiplied. Yet the moon remained untouched by human boots. That pause turns Apollo into something even more remarkable than a first chapter. It becomes a chapter that was never followed quickly enough. The tracks stayed where they were, while the species that made them remained on Earth, still remembering what it once managed to do. That long absence makes the first landing feel even more astonishing. If humans had returned to the moon every few years since Apollo, the first landing would still be historic, but it might feel more like the start of a familiar pattern. Instead, the decades-long gap has preserved its rarity. The event now sits in a strange light, both documented and almost unbelievable. The more time passes without another human return, the more the original mission seems to glow with a kind of impossible boldness. It begins to feel less like routine progress and more like a sudden leap that history itself has struggled to repeat. That is part of why Apollo keeps deepening in the imagination. It is not only old enough to be legendary, it is also unmatched in a very specific human way. The first landing stands alone across a widening stretch of time, which makes it feel even more improbable and daring. Distance does not shrink the feat. It enlarges it, because so much time has passed without surpassing its human presence. Artemis plans aim to return humans to the lunar surface. The story of human lunar exploration is not necessarily over. The Artemis program has been built around the goal of sending astronauts back to the moon, this time with new technologies, broader ambitions, and the intention of establishing a more lasting pattern of presence. That future-facing effort gives Apollo a fascinating double role. It is both history and precedent. The old footprints become not only relics, but reference points for a new generation preparing to go farther. Artemis carries with it hopes of landing new crews, exploring different regions, and building the knowledge needed for longer missions and perhaps later journeys deeper into space. What makes this so compelling is the sense of continuity across time. The first great leap may yet become the foundation for another era of exploration. The moon that once seemed briefly visited and then abandoned may again hear human voices over its dust. Apollo showed it could be done. Artemis aims to prove that the journey can begin again. The first moon landing still shapes how we imagine the future. Even now, when people picture humanity's future in space, the imagination often reaches back through Apollo. The image of a suited figure on another world, the idea of intelligent courage carried by machines beyond Earth, the belief that large collective effort can achieve something once thought impossible, all of that still bears the imprint of 1969. The mission remains a template for hope, ambition, and seriousness. It suggests that the future is not only something that happens to us, it is something we can decide to build through vision, discipline, and risk. That is why the landing still matters to people born long after it occurred. It continues to shape the emotional architecture of tomorrow. When we talk about Mars, lunar bases, deep space travel, or the next giant leap, Apollo is often there in the background, whispering that impossible things have happened before. The future still borrows some of its courage from the night human beings first walked on the moon. For one brief moment, human footprints reached beyond Earth and stayed. There is something profoundly moving about the finality of those marks. On Earth, footsteps are temporary. They are washed away, trampled, blown over, or forgotten. On the moon, the first human tracks remained. For a brief span in history, two people crossed the dust of another world, and the evidence of that crossing stayed where it was made. That image contains much of Apollo's power. It joins transience and permanence in the same gesture. The astronauts were there only a short time. Their visit was fleeting, yet the traces they left behind endured in a landscape almost designed to remember. Those footprints say more than that humans visited the moon. They say that, for a moment, life from Earth extended itself outward and physically touched the wider cosmos. The marks remain as quiet proof, but the boundary of human presence once moved beyond our home world. History was written there not in ink or stone, but in dust that still keeps the shape of a boot. Tonight, we traced one of the most extraordinary journeys in human history. We followed a path from the tensions of the Cold War to the bright fire of launch, from the long crossing through darkness to that silent grey world waiting beneath the Eagle. We stood beside Armstrong and Aldrin as they stepped onto untouched dust. We drifted with Michael Collins in lonely orbit above them. We looked at moon rocks, black skies, strange shadows, fragile machines, and that bright living Earth hanging far away in the dark. It is an incredible story, because it feels both vast and intimate at once. Great rockets rose, computers guided, and thousands upon thousands of people played their part. And yet in the end, so much of it comes down to simple human moments. A heartbeat rising, a hand on a control, a boot pressing into soft dust, a glance back toward home. And now, as this journey comes to a close, you can let all of that begin to soften. Let the moon drift farther away. Let the voices of mission control fade into the distance. Let the great machinery fall still. And let your thoughts grow quieter, as if you too are floating gently in that wide and endless dark, with nothing more to do tonight. If you enjoyed this journey, you might like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps other wandering minds find their way here too. And if you happen to still be awake, there will be another video waiting for you on the screen. For now, just rest. Let your breathing slow. Let your body grow heavy. And let history fade gently into sleep. Sleep well, and good night.